Okay, hello everybody. It's time to start this session, PS35. The topic of this session is privacy and safety, I think. And we are having 4 papers. The first paper, let me introduce first paper. The title is Usability, Acceptance, and Trust of Privacy Protection Mechanisms and Identity Management in Social Virtual Reality. Jinghuai will be presenting this paper, and just a moment, let me introduce myself. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Hideo Saito from Keio University, Japan. I'm really happy to be session chair of this interesting session. Okay, so please start. Jinghuai.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Jinghuai. I'm from the Human-Computer Interaction Group of University of Würzburg. Today I will present our paper, Usability, Acceptance, and Trust of Privacy Protection Mechanisms and Identity Management in Social Virtual Reality. So this paper is co-authored with Christian Rack, Carolin, Wienrich, Marc, Erich, Latoschik. Social VR is an emerging form of social networking that hold great potentials by enabling users from around the world to connect and interact in highly immersive virtual environments. It offers a greater sense of social presence and interactivities compared to the traditional platforms. And together with the advancements such as photorealistic avatar, social VR users can now embody an avatar of their own likeness and engage in social virtual activities as themselves, as if the virtual world is the extension of the real world. However, the integration of these still maturing technologies brings challenges, and particularly in terms of privacy and identity. So as summarized by Lin and Latoschik, these challenges includes but are not limited to identity theft, violent assault, sexual harassment, personal information leakage, to name a few. And these challenges highlight the need for authenticities and the accountabilities for users, more effective identity management, and various protection mechanisms. So researchers and social VR developers have proposed various countermeasures to address these challenges already. And in our study, we explored user preference for different identity management and privacy protection features and examined their impacts on users' acceptance and trust in social VR. So our goal is to provide design guidelines for developers to create a more trustworthy social VR system. Our method includes developing a social VR prototype that incorporates various existing or novel protection features and mechanisms. And through usabilities and users testing, we collected both quantitative and qualitative feedbacks. So 3 main aspects was investigated, and for the sake of time, in this presentation, we will focus primarily on the result of the first aspect. But nevertheless, we will summarize key findings of the remaining tools, but please refer to our paper if you would be interested in more detail. So with the versatility of XR device and the large amount of sensory data that they collect, developers and researchers has begun to use XR biometric for users' identifications and verifications. So these modalities include iris, eye gaze, head movement, hand movement, just to name a few. And here we want to specifically highlight motion-based verifications. So motion data is available on almost all modern XR devices now, and significant research has been conducted in this area. So for example, the recent work of Erich et al. Demonstrate both high accuracies and high editability. However, to our knowledge, none of these motion-based approach has been empirically studied from a usability or UX perspective. So this leads us to our first research questions. How do motion verification attributes impact usabilities and trust in social VR? So we manipulated 2 independent variables. For the first one, firstly, we compare active versus passive verifications. For active verifications, we use a recently published method developed by our colleague, which is called the motion password. So participants were required to actively perform a certain action, and here they are required to write out their preferred password with their virtual finger in the air. So I have included a little QR code here in case you would be interested in the paper, you can check it out. And then in comparison, in the passive verifications, participants were not required to perform any certain or specific actions, so they were verified, although through this, by the same modality, like their hand and head movement, but they were verified automatically in the background. So, and second, we manipulate the frequency of the verification. So in one conditions, participants will verify periodically when performing certain actions, while in the other conditions, they will verify only once. Our study also addresses a second aspect, which is the interplay between users' awareness. So user awareness is their privacy and security knowledge in social networking tools, and so between user awareness and online disclosure behavior. So this includes their willingness to use their real-life identity, their willingness to use their personal photorealistic avatar, and the sharing of their personal information. And lastly, we focused on user preference on different protection features, protection mechanisms. So as I list here, many mechanisms has actually been created, and some of them are implemented in some social VR platform. For example, you can see this trust ranking system from BRCS that can, to some extent, help users to decide whether they can trust someone or not. And also, we have something like personal boundary or personal bubble that has been implemented in many social VR platforms already. We also have the identity visual indications introduced by our previous works and some other mechanisms or features. So in my opinion, these features and mechanisms translate the abstract protection into visible and actionable, into visible actionable options for user, and then it could enhance users' trust in the virtual world. However, insights or design guidelines have previously focused on individual features while lacking the key factor of user-centered design for such mechanism and the exploration of users' diverse privacy preference. So with our study, we also examine what are the key factors in the design of protection mechanisms that enhance users' acceptance and trust, and how can users' autonomies and the choice of anonymities be safeguarded. So here is our methodologies. For the motion verifications, we use a 2x2 mixed design in our experiment. And for measurement, we use the short version of the user experience questionnaires, the trust in automated system tests, and some custom Leica questions, along with open-end questions for qualitative feedback. And for the investigation of online disclosures and also privacy preference regarding protection mechanism, we collect quantitative feedback using custom Leica scale questions and qualitative feedback through open-end questions in the pre and post questionnaire. And as you can see here, we showcase the registration phase of the prototype, so user will have to register an account for it, and we are also recording some behavior, like how much information they are sharing, as behavior measures. So the experiment procedure is outlined here. After completing the pre-questionnaires and some basic tutorial, participants enter an exhibition scenes and interacting with several agents, which simulates a social VR environment, and tested both motion verifications and various protection features. And following the simulations, they completed a post-questionnaire to provide feedbacks. And after that, participants will return on a different days for a second section to experience the other condition related to the verification frequency. So a total of 52 participants recruited from the University of Würzburg completed the experiment. So now let's go to the result. For usabilities, we found that the passive verifications outperform active verifications in chromatic quality. But in contrast, active verifications actually show a higher hedonic quality. And we couldn't find many effect on the frequency or interaction. So the previous results suggest that passive design are considered better at completing the task. On the other hand, active design might be considered more pleasurable to use. Of course, this is also a bit depending on the specific design that has been implemented. And for the trust aspect, we found that continuous verification are rated significantly higher than the one-time verifications, and this could suggest that participants might feel more confidence in the system performance under continuous verifications. And results from our custom questions also suggest that they feel safer under the continuous conditions. And then here are some key findings about user awareness and online disclosure. Firstly, we observe varying level of willingness to disclose true identity or to use their personalized photorealistic avatars across different social VR or scenario, as you can see here. So they tend to be more, they tend to enclose their identity more in some more serious scenario like medical or work, while in games or entertainment, they prefer not to. Secondly, there was a generally low interest in sharing information. However, after experiencing these protection features, we found an increasing willingness to use personalized photorealistic avatar or their real-life identity in certain social VR scenario. Our result also shows that higher user awareness will negatively impact the sharing of personal information. So here we also sum up some key factors that contribute to user privacy preference. So firstly, we found that fairness and repository are always important according to their answer to our open questions. And while many participants is in favor of more authenticity, both for themselves and for other users, they also vary autonomy, which is their ability to choose what to review and to whom. And the freedom of anonymities, or whether to enclose or not, also play an important role. And there were also some security or privacy concerns regarding the potential abuse of biometric verifications and identity management system. So here we just want to list some implication or some takeaway as a short summary. So firstly, for motion verifications, we suggest that using decreased yet reassuring signals during the passive verification could enhance the sense of security without being intrusive. And it was also revealed that users desire greater authenticity in social VRs, but this does not necessarily translate to sharing extensive personal information. And we also believe that IDN systems should be achieved without compelling users to compromise their privacy and choice of anonymity. And individual preference of IDN and privacy protection are very diverse, and especially depending on the context and the scenario, and also users' personal preference. Lastly, here are some most mentioned keywords that contribute to what should be taken into account when designing such a system, which is authenticity, autonomies, and reciprocity. So that concludes my presentation, and here are my reference. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your feedback or questions.
All right, thank you for the presentation. So any questions or comments or any discussions? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. Brendan David John from Virginia Tech. I really appreciate that you brought people back for a second session, just in your study flow. I'm curious, just kind of future thinking, does long-term use of this, for months and months, do you think that's going to impact trust over time as people get more, much more comfortable with the technology?
I think, of course, I think one of the limitations of study is this is more like a one-time, although they actually come for a second session, but I wouldn't consider this is a long-term use. And I think users' privacy preference will actually be very different on, let's say, commercial social VR platform that they already can make some friends there and have some actual social interaction. So that is also one of the future direction that we want to do. We want to conduct a similar study on a more mature social VR platform, and then we can observe whether the long-term use of this platform, and also what's the difference between more experienced users and more the first-time users. Yeah, I hope that answers your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions or comments, please? Okay. So, please.
Hi, Sean MacDonald from University of Glasgow. I thought it was really, really interesting research, and it's a big issue, right? This the ease of which you can do impersonation. I like this as a solution to tackle direct impersonation. Obviously, social VR is also a space, as you outlined at the beginning, where people you can change how you present and really choose your presentation more than any other situation.
Yeah.
Do you foresee any kind of concerns or essentially misapplication of this kind of technology that would prevent people or harm people from doing that kind of self-expression if this became normalized on a platform? So, for example, if people are giving over these metrics and they are being verified, for people who go to these spaces so they are safe spaces where they can change and escape their identity or present it differently, do you think that's a concern, or do you think that it should be easy enough to kind of separate those two issues so it's just about specifically impersonation?
And do you mean the concern of impersonation or the concern of people would not be able to change their presentation?
So I mean that the idea that you can verify people, it's great for stopping impersonation, but I worry that you could also use it to kind of impact people who are trying not to impersonate, but simply to express differently, assume a different role or a different identity online.
So there's actually a lot of study focusing on motion identification rather than authentication. So, and people are also developing some technique to fight against, I don't want to be identified just through my motions. So yeah, there's actually a lot of things going on. And here we are more focusing on the system design aspect, how you can. So in my personal opinion, when I'm online, I probably don't want to disclose too much of my information, but when users choose to disclose their identity, I think we also need to have some way to protect themselves and also protect other users in this kind of environment.
Thank you. And I loved your study design, by the way. I loved your approach.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for very interesting discussion. But it's time up, and let's thank Jinghuai again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, please prepare for the next presentation. Okay, so next presentation is titled Visceral interfaces for privacy awareness of eye tracking in virtual reality.
Hi.
Okay, so please start, Nikki. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nikki Ramirez-Saffy. I'm from the Computer Science Department at Virginia Tech, and today I'm presenting visceral interfaces for privacy awareness of eye tracking in VR. This project was done in collaboration with Rochester Institute of Technology and Stanford University. First, let's discuss the motivation of this paper, the importance of eye movements in processing and responding to VR interfaces. While audio, haptics, smell, and taste provide our understanding of the world, the vast majority of interface cues are visual in nature. This video with a HoloLens 2 highlights interaction modalities of gaze and pinch. Eye tracking can be used to facilitate graphics optimizations such as foveated rendering, and we expect eye tracking to become standard in future VR displays. In addition, eye tracking information can reveal personally identifiable information through gaze patterns. Such information can include racial demographics, gender, sexual orientation, racial biases, and more. In other words, our eyes give us away. There are already some proposed solutions to maintaining eye tracking privacy, such as limiting data access or adding noise. However, developers are in control of these solutions, not users. The image on the right presents a Unity plugin, MetaGuard, proposed by researchers. While this implements privacy-preserving mechanisms on biometric data, it is something developers must integrate into the app themselves in order for users to access. In addition, the adoption of these privacy-preserving mechanisms on consumer devices is unknown. Privacy and security indicators are not new. They are used to quickly inform users of potential privacy and security risks or protections. Easily interpretable indicators allow users to make decisions about data sharing. However, it can be difficult to convey complex privacy concepts to users with an icon. Users may have different interpretations of what these indicators mean. Such indicators have not yet been adapted to VR, and the presence of new sensors, such as eye tracking, may not be as well known to users. The traditional method for informing users on privacy risks is through notice and consent through terms and conditions. These documents are filled with legal jargon made to protect the company rather than the user. In addition, the prompt may not explain to the user how their data will be used. The image on the left is a notification on an iPhone's calendar. The calendar is requesting access to the user's location, explains it is required, and provides some examples on how the data will be used. However, the user may not think about what other uses the app may use their data for, such as providing personalized advertisements. In addition, this notice is only presented once, and users may forget they allowed their calendar app access to their location, or the user may forget to revoke access. Notice and consent is not going away, so how do we reduce friction and improve these notices? Visceral notices are experientially rich strategies to communicate privacy risks. Ryan Callow proposes 3 methods for achieving this: familiarity as warning, psychological response as notice, and showing. Familiarity as warning leverages users' familiarity with quickly perceived and easily interpreted experiences. The shutter and flash on a camera informs those nearby that their photo may have been taken. Psychological responses notice uses visual or audio stimuli to trigger psychological responses to encourage caution and make users aware of threats. By placing a pair of eyes near a tip jar, baristas received higher tips due to customers feeling they were being watched and judged if they did not tip. Showing vividly presents risks and adverse consequences, including those tailored to individual users. A banker discussing the details of a loan informs customers what they are agreeing to and the consequences of the inability to repay the loan. For our design, we focused on familiarity as warning and psychological responses notice. These ideas have been proposed, however, these notices have not been deployed in VR, nor have they been evaluated from privacy awareness or user experience perspectives. This is where our research comes in. Our contributions include evaluating visceral interface designs for VR eye tracking data that impact user privacy awareness. These include a new interface for eye tracking permissions requests and providing a comparison between visceral gaze visualizations. Our interfaces are publicly available to developers. In addition, we provide design recommendations for VR privacy awareness indicators to inform practitioners. We designed a novel permissions request for eye tracking. We sought to balance usability and interaction and inform users as to what they are consenting to when they enable eye tracking. One issue we identified was similar to that of the chicken or the egg. To uphold user privacy, how can we show users what it means to agree to eye tracking without enabling eye tracking in the first place? Therefore, we used head rotation as a proxy for eye tracking. Here's the implementation of the head dwell selection. The user selects an app from the application bar. The application loads, and a pop-up appears on screen stating, "This application uses eye tracking. To enable, turn your head to face the icon until it turns blue." The user turns their head along the gradient line. When the user looks at the icon, it begins to fill. And when the user turns their head away, the icon timer is reset. The icon fills after a time and informs the user eye tracking has been enabled. For the gaze visualizations, we had 2 designs, tendril and icon. For the tendril visualization, we leveraged psychological responses notice. Due to the constant visual feedback, the idea is to overtly remind the user of their eye movements at all times. We also wanted to focus on the depth of tendril and the intersections with objects. For the icon visualization, we leveraged familiarity as notice. By having a pair of eyes constantly staring at users, it was designed to be creepy in order to serve as a powerful reminder that their eyes are being tracked. Here's the implementation of the tendril visualization. The crosshair represents where the user is looking, and the tendril follows the crosshair, mapping past gaze position. When the crosshair intersects with an object, it adjusts its movement with respect to the object's shape. If the crosshair does not intersect with an object, it renders to its maximum draw distance. The crosshair and tendril are enlarged for presentation purposes. Here's the icon visualization. The eyes mirror the gaze of the user. When the user looks to the right, the eyes turn to the right. So our research questions are as follows. 1, do visceral interfaces increase privacy awareness or concerns for eye tracking data? And 2, do users perceive and interpret each interface scenario differently? And do they prefer the tendril or icon interface for data visualization? This is our user study flow. For brevity, we will not be going into detail for this. However, we would like to note that we showed all participants a primer video on eye tracking privacy risks to ensure all participants had the same level of knowledge with respect to such risks. Participant attitudes towards privacy awareness and data sharing were then recorded and were also recorded at the end of the experiment. NASA TLX scores and interface assessments were recorded after the permissions request and after each interface. The objective in the task was a free roam exploration of an art gallery. Art was populated into the environment using a publicly available data set. Participants were asked to explore the art gallery and select 5 paintings they enjoyed most. When participants encountered a painting they enjoyed, they would lift the controller and pull the trigger to select a painting. This would increment a counter and inform users of the number of paintings they selected. We recruited 40 participants. 5 were removed due to them experiencing severe simulation sickness. This resulted in 35 participants, 18 women and 17 men, with the majority of participants being either Asian or Caucasian or white, being within the 20 to 26 age range, and having prior VR experience. To answer research question 1, participants were asked about their data sharing preferences during the pre- and post-experiment surveys. These questions were based on another paper exploring data sharing preferences. For brevity, we are only presenting the results where the median values changed between the pre- and post-experiments. After experiencing the interfaces, participants were less willing to share their data with non-health government agencies, themselves via a home cloud network, an employer's internal user, for benefits, and to benefit VR applications. This reflects an aggregate change in participants' willingness to share data, highlighting a significant shift in attitudes after engaging with the different interfaces. To answer research question 2, we measured the NASA TLX scores for gaze visualization usability. No statistically significant differences were found in terms of usability for the gaze visualizations. In terms of the interface assessment, participants found Tendril to be more useful, exciting, interesting, and sophisticated, and participants preferred Tendril overall. While participants preferred Tendril, they also found it to be distracting. Despite this, participants found Tendril to be more informative and made them aware of eye tracking. For the permissions request, we found participants experienced low physical and mental demand, low frustration, and achieved high performance using head dwell as a proxy for eye tracking. In addition, it is notable that despite the permissions request using head tracking, not eye tracking, participants found the interface brought attention to eye tracking, and participants thought the interface responded to their eye movements. We also asked participants questions on how the interfaces influenced their gaze patterns. One participant noted how they found icon to be, quote, very uncomfortable and avoided looking at nude imagery. Another stated icon was, quote, creepy, though they did not avoid looking anywhere despite this. Some participants verbally expressed their disdain for icon during the experiment. Participants did not like the icon gaze visualization. Despite some users self-reporting that they avoided looking in certain places due to the interfaces did not have a significant impact on how users interacted with the environment. Median values for dwell time and selections remain the same across gaze visualizations. To answer our research questions, we found participants were less inclined to share their data after experiencing these interfaces and were less likely to opt into data collection. In addition, participants found Tendril to be more distracting, more informative, and increased awareness of eye-tracking data collection. Participants were disturbed by icon and were less distracted. And participants suggested neither interface should be enabled by default. Some implications: users wanted the option to toggle the interfaces on and off depending on their needs. They also wanted the option to customize the interfaces, including changing the color of the Tendril. We recommend developers use visceral interfaces to inform users. In addition, as shown with the permissions request, head movement can be used as a proxy for eye tracking. This eliminates the chicken or the egg problem of needing to enable eye tracking to visualize such data collection. Since it can be used as a proxy, users can try out the interface before enabling eye tracking and preserving their privacy. We recommend designers and policymakers should experience visceral interfaces themselves in order to educate, train for the workplace, and inform policy. The Magic Leap 2, an AR device, has already implemented policy requiring developers to inform users when eye tracking is in use, though widespread implementation is not known at this time. We've also included a public link to our open source prototypes. Some limitations of the study: while we achieved gender parity, we did not have a diverse population. Most participants were college-age students who had prior VR experience. Another limitation: we performed this task on an emulated VR home environment in Unity, not a default one such as Oculus's. Finally, our study does not explore long-term effects on privacy. Our future work includes evaluating the showing aspect of visceral notices within interfaces, testing performance on different tasks, and implementation in AR. There are other factors to consider when testing with AR. The always-on Meta Ray-Bans or Orion provide some challenges in how users will interact with a combination of virtual and real objects. Such factors should be considered when designing such interfaces for AR. While we cannot beat notice and consent, such as terms and conditions, our work has shown that visceral notices can be used as an available experience. Thank you for your time. We would like to acknowledge that this project was supported by the NSF CS Grad for US, the Virginia Tech New Horizons Graduate Scholars Program, and a gift from Reality Labs. This concludes my talk. I will now take any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments? No? Okay.
Hi, I really liked your paper and the work you presented. I was thinking, the indicator you had with the eyes looking around, what made you use eyes to represent eyes, like looking back at you?
Sure. So we actually had a philosopher and a design expert as part of our collaboration with RIT. And the idea comes from Ryan Callow's kind of idea of the psychological responses notice. So that whole concept is you have to create something visceral. You have to create something that gives somebody this kind of gut reaction. And when you have something looking at you and mirroring your movements, it creates this kind of like creepy, icky feeling. And so that's what we were trying to go for.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree that when watching, I kind of forgot these are also like my eyes looking back at me and not just someone's judging me. Or like the person said, looking at like nude paintings, look at the other paintings, I guess.
For sure.
Thank you. I really like your talk.
All right. Anything else? Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And my question is about your tantrum condition. From what we can see, it has a line and also like a reticle at the end of the line.
Yes.
So the other end of the line is always going to be the eye location. Is that true?
Yes, correct. So the crosshair is where the user is looking, and then the tendril is used to show where their past gaze position was. Because one of the ideas is if you can see how your eyes are moving, it kind of gives you a better idea of what it actually means when data collection is actually happening. A lot of people mentioned, oh, I didn't realize that my eyes jittered a lot because it's just not something that you necessarily think about when you think that you're looking at something head on. You think that it's straight, but actually going and seeing the tiny movements and everything helped bring their awareness to eye tracking.
Yeah. So I guess my question is some of the participants mentioned that the visualization can be distracting.
Yes.
So I was wondering what is the design consideration for adding the line? Because the line is actually taking a lot of space in the whole visualization. So if you just visualize the crosshair instead of the line, do you think it's gonna, what effects do you think it's gonna have on the user, on privacy awareness and also user satisfaction?
For sure, and I think that's one reason why participants suggested to be able to toggle it, because they actually said that the crosshair itself made it difficult to see what was actually underneath the crosshair. They're trying to see this painting, and it's like, man, I can't really see it because there's this crosshair in the way. So I think the ability, and that's where where participants suggested the ability to toggle things on and off. So having, I think that toggle it depends on the task that they're going to be performing anyway. Having the ability to toggle in a task where they have to examine something, perhaps a visual search task or a free roam art gallery task, I think would be more beneficial for sure. But we wanted that ability for users to be able to see where their gaze was prior. But yes, I think adjusting the toggle and customizing it, perhaps the tendril length or something, was something to consider as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. It's maybe time up. Let's thank Nikki again. Thank you very much. All right. So please prepare. Okay, go ahead. So the next presentation is titled Direction-Based Authentication, Combining Symbolic Input and the Contextual Cues for Virtual Reality Password Entry. So the presentation will be you Shaun?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Hideo.
Yeah. It's okay.
I think it's, oops, not sure why. It's on the other, sorry. I'm just pulling it over. Yeah, sorry, I'm using Google Slides because my PowerPoint
Can you make
license
it?
expired. I can make it work. It's
Okay.
just a little hard to work on 2 screens at the same time, sorry.
I see. Please, okay, good. So please start.
Yep. Okay. Hi, my name is Shaun. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Minnesota. Oops, sorry. Get this done. Okay. I'm here to present direction-based authentication, combining symbolic input and contextual cues for virtual reality password entry. In this work, we proposed a novel idea for designing authentication methods in VR and presented a prototype to achieve highly efficient and memorable authentication without compromising security. So in our work, we focus on knowledge-based authentication, which authenticates a user using the information they remember. Knowledge-based authentication is very commonly used in our daily life, and examples include 4-digit PIN, alphanumeric passwords, pattern unlock, etc. The main advantage of this approach is that it's usually very simple and it doesn't have hardware dependency. The main disadvantage is that it requires the users to remember the passwords and enter them explicitly during authentication. So for knowledge-based authentication in VR, we can divide them into 2 categories depending on the type of information they remember. The first type of authentication is symbol-based, where the users remember symbols, such as letters or digits. And the other type of authentication is context-based, where the users remember graphical information or context information in a 3D virtual environment. The main advantage of symbol-based method is that it can enable high efficiency, because especially when the symbol set is small, because the symbols are usually aggregated on a small panel and you can enter by simply tapping on them. The main disadvantage is memorability, because strong symbol-based passwords can be difficult to remember. For context-based methods, it's completely the opposite. They're known for memorability due to the picture superiority effect, which is the tendency for people to remember pictures better than words. However, they're usually inefficient because it requires the user to search for visual targets in a virtual environment. So it looks like we have to choose either efficiency or memorability to prioritize, but both are actually very important for authentication. So the motivation of our work is to see if there's a way to achieve the best of both worlds. And what ended up inspiring us was this very common object, a compass. We know that a compass is what we use to tell directions, but what's actually very interesting is that a direction can actually be interpreted in both ways. For example, a direction can be associated with a symbol. Like these guys here, they are directions, but also symbols. A direction can also be associated with context if you think about what you see in that corresponding direction. So based on this inspiration, we proposed direction-based authentication, or DBA, which combines symbol and context-based authentication methods in a unifying manner. So in DBA, the user will enter 4 different environments, and for each environment, we divide it into 8 directions, and the user chooses 1 direction in each environment as part of their password. The user can also see a compass, which shows the direction they're facing in real time, and the user can change direction by physical turning, like the video to the left, and also they can simply tap on the direction buttons to perform snap turning, like the video to the right. And as you can see from the videos, whenever the direction changes, a glossy frame will highlight the corresponding context for about a second before they fade out to indicate which portion of the environment corresponds to the new direction. Yep. Okay. And when the user presses the Enter button in the center, their current direction will be recorded as their selection, and they will move on to the next environment. The initial direction when the user enters a virtual environment is randomized each time to counter observation attack. So the rationale behind our design is that we want to include the virtual environment because they provide context information to facilitate memorization, and we also want to include the compass as a symbolic entry method to improve efficiency. So to evaluate DBA, and more importantly, the idea behind it to combine symbol and context-based authentication methods, we conducted a user study with 3 conditions. The combined condition, which is the same as DBA, a symbol-only condition, and a context-only condition. Our hypothesis is that the combined method would be more efficient than using context-only and more memorable than using symbol-only. We also hypothesized that all 3 methods are robust against observation attack, which means bystanders shouldn't be able to guess the passwords based on observing the body movements during the entry. The study is a 2-session within-subject study with exactly 7 days between the 2 sessions. We recruited 32 participants aged between 18 and 44, and 12 of them were female. The study took about an hour for the first session, half an hour for the second, and the participants received $25 for compensation after completing both sessions. The study was also approved by the University of Minnesota IRB. So for the study procedure, in the first session, we first measured the entry time, and for each condition, the participants completed a practice trial where they created a predetermined password and entered it correctly for 3 times. And then we move on to the formal trials, which was the same procedure, except that they needed to enter 3 different passwords for each condition and enter each password correctly for 5 times. And we recorded the time for each entry. At the end of the first session, we asked the participants to create their own passwords for each condition and enter them correctly for 3 times. And then at the beginning of the second session, after exactly 7 days, we asked them to re-enter the passwords they created at the end of the first session in up to 3 attempts. And we calculated the successful recall rate. It's important to note that the participants were uninformed of the recall task when they created the password in the first session in case they cheat by writing down the symbol-based passwords. And lastly, at the end of the second session, the participants performed observation attacks by watching pre-recorded videos of the experimenter entering the passwords and guess what the passwords were. They watched 2 videos for each condition and had up to 3 attempts for each password. And we recorded how many times the attack was successful. We also inserted questionnaires after each task to get subjective feedback from the participants regarding the 3 conditions. And the order of the 3 conditions were counterbalanced across participants. In terms of the results, for entry efficiency, we found significant differences between all 3 pairwise comparisons. The symbol-only method was the fastest, followed by the combined method, and the context-only method was the slowest. And this result supports our first hypothesis. We also compare the entry time when they enter a password for the first time versus the 5th time, and we found significant decreases in all 3 conditions, indicating strong learning effects. For memorability, we found that the context-only method was having the highest recall rate, about 94%, which was significantly higher than symbol-only or combined conditions. This confirmed that the context information we provided were highly memorable. However, there were no significant difference between the combined and the symbol-only method, which seemed to indicate that the combined method wasn't actually memorable. But when we look into the forgotten passwords in the combined condition, 9 out of the 12 were clearly created based on symbols, because they were things like NNNN, NENE, etc. In other words, the low recall rate of the combined method was largely due to the participants relying only on the symbols when choosing passwords, which we can expect to be improved if we require them to choose the passwords based on context by simply not showing them the symbols during password creation. The participants were also asked to rank the 3 methods in terms of efficiency and memorability, And most participants consider the combined method to be the most efficient and memorable, which supports both our first and second hypotheses. Many participants specifically remarked that the visual information was a lot easier to recall. 11 participants reported relying on both types of information for password recall, one as the default and the other as sanity check. And 4 reported focusing on a single type of information, and 1 reported that they tried to use a symbol for some directions and context for others, but couldn't remember the password after the 7 days. For security, all 3 methods were robust against observation attacks, which supports our third hypothesis. Only 1 attack was successful in the combined condition, which was a random guess, but that also indicated that the password space of our method, which was 8 to the power of 4th, was probably too small. This could be improved by further dividing the virtual environments into 10 directions instead of 8, and using 0 to 9 instead of the direction symbols. For context-based password, we noticed some very interesting patterns. For example, participants chose to remember all kinds of objects, from cars, people, to air conditioner, or anything. They also paid special attention to colors, mentioning the yellow car, the red tower, etc., when asked to describe their context-based passwords in words. However, we also noticed that certain objects were commonly chosen across participants. For example, they all have a preference for salient landmarks, such as the red tower in this environment. This indicates that we should avoid salient landmarks in the environments we use in case the passwords get homogeneous. And also, we should instruct the users to choose passwords, choose visual features that are not only memorable to themselves, but also less likely to be noticed by others. So for conclusion, in this work, we proposed a novel idea to combine symbol and context-based authentication methods. The results of our study showed that the idea is promising in optimizing both efficiency and memorability. And our specific implementation, DBA, is robust against observation attacks. We also identified potential improvements on DBA for future work, including expanding the password space and specific guidelines for choosing both the virtual environments and the passwords themselves. And that is the end of my presentation. I would like to acknowledge my co-leading author, Dan Hua, and also Professor Evan Suma Rosenberg for their contribution to this work. And thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, questions?
Yep. Yeah, thank you for the great talk. Have you thought about subdividing the grid vertically as well? Because I know you mentioned you could increase the number of cuts to increase the password space, but you might get less salient objects or more difficulty in remembering. But even like the tower example you gave, say the horizon cuts through that, it kind of could be my secret if I want that tower plus top or tower plus bottom. Have you thought about kind of increasing the password space that way?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think that would definitely help in terms of like further subdividing the environment. But one potential issue I can think of is that the body movements will kind of give away if they're looking at like the bottom half or the top half. So we will have to, yeah, we'll have to see. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, so I also have, if you are talking about some sort of the top and bottom, maybe you can also use some sort of the head motion tracking or something technology, so that you can also divide into the vertical action that he also asked. So how do you think about using head motion tracking technology?
Using head motion tracking technology to achieve...
to achieve not only the horizontal direction, but also you can use the vertical positions to enhance the password.
You mean like using biometric kind of... Yeah. So that's actually, I think a lot of work are actually doing authentication in a hybrid method. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's still, like what was mentioned in Jinghuai's presentation earlier. They have this passive, they have this active behavioral biometric authentication methods where people are supposed to perform certain actions, and then they use the biometric behavioral information to further differentiate whether this is actually the person that is supposed to be authenticated or not. So it's like they have 2 layers of security. One is the password, whether they remember whether they're entering the right thing, and the second one is like their body movements when they're entering the password. So that's definitely a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, it's time. Yeah, let's thank you again. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the last presentation of this session. Okay, the last presentation is Don't Record My Private PARTs, Understanding the Role of Sensitive Context and Privacy Perception in Influence Attitude Towards Everyday Augmented Reality Sensor Usage. Okay. So the authors, Melvin will be presenting. Okay. Okay, so please start. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melvin. I'm a PhD student from the University of Glasgow. I'm presenting my work on behalf of my co-authors and myself, titled Don't Record My Private Parts, Understanding the Role of Sensitive Contexts and Privacy Perceptions in Influencing Attitudes Towards Everyday Augmented Reality Sensor Usage. So we're seeing advancements in AR technology where the physical form factor of these AR glasses are becoming much more fashionable and smaller in size. So when I'm referring to everyday augmented reality, I'm referring to glasses that look a lot like these. The idea is in the future, people are wearing these AR headsets continuously and throughout most of their day, similar to how we're using smartphones today. So to set the scene, there are some important factors and attributes to be aware of. One of them being is that these headsets are equipped with always-on sensors. The idea is that these sensors don't turn off, they're continuously collecting information, and they're collecting and processing data to augment the user's view of the world. And these sensors are needed. They're fundamental for features such as SLAM tracking, for surface tracking, and context awareness. These always-on sensors are fundamental for the headset to work. This then really becomes a problem because the headsets are used and they'll see prolonged use throughout the day. They'll be in different locations, different contexts. As you can see here, the bathroom, outside, at home, in the bedroom, at work. And then finally, these headsets have an increased quality, quantity, and scope of data collection compared to other technologies such as smartphones today. Even though they're the same sensors, it's the headset in use. The position of the headset in use is the exact same as not in use. So as you can see here also, the headset can detect such as your vacuum cleaning, a render of your whole house. So what did we do? We conducted a survey with the aim to find out what locations and scenarios people find private while wearing these AR headsets. And then we found out which sensors in particular should be limited or restricted while in those privacy-sensitive scenarios. So our final data set was made up from responses of 100 participants, and then we collected 552 scenarios in total. We then took the locations and then thematically grouped them into 7 sensitive context archetypes based on the scenario that was provided. So the scenario helped us understand what actually made this location private in the first place. So our survey starts off pretty standard. The participants read an information sheet and consent form. Next, they were onboarded onto what an AR headset is and the sensing capabilities of those headsets. This allowed us to have all our participants have a baseline understanding of what these headsets can do and collect. And then we collected demographics and privacy attitudes. We then collected a baseline of how appropriate it was for data types that were derived from AR sensing capabilities to be collected in general, regardless of location or context. We then asked participants to suggest a sensitive location, and then a scenario within that location that makes it sensitive in the first place, and then rate how appropriate it was for the sensor to collect the previous data types while in that scenario. So if we look a bit at the data, so this graph shows the sensor appropriateness scores for the baseline, which is in the red, and all the combined sensitive locations in the blue. So higher the number, more appropriate the sensor was to be active. As you can see, in all the data types, it was considered less appropriate for the sensitive locations for the sensor to be active. And then the scores did vary kind of on the sensor type. As you can see, some were more inappropriate than others. The body sensor here was always more appropriate than the GPS. So we took all these locations and scenarios, and then we formed these 7 sensitive context archetypes based on the thematic coding. So as you can see here, the archetypes are modesty, undress, in the home, presence of confidential information, rules prohibiting certain data collection, the risk to your data being quantified, when you're expecting solitude, and when you're outside in public. We took the archetypes, analyzed them, and created this heat map of the appropriateness of certain data types being collected. The darker the color, less appropriate it was for the data type to be collected. There's much, much more information in the paper. This is but a very high-level understanding is that people mostly seemed concerned about the front camera, the microphone, and biometric data such as eye tracking and EEG. So we started looking at the archetypes. If we look here for modesty and nudity, the most sensitive location here was the bathroom, with the least appropriate sensor being the front camera or microphone. As you can see, our participants mentioned that the locations such as the toilet, the bathroom, the shower, they mentioned if the data could be pretty embarrassing if captured. P66 goes on to say if the information was leaked, it could lead to blackmailing and cyberbullying. The next one is, as you see in the home environment, the most inappropriate sensor was the front-facing camera, the microphone, and EEG. Participants had shared the sentiment that it was more than just their own privacy that they're affecting here. As shared by P10, it's no longer just affects me, but also my family. Or shared by P7 here, that it's an intimate moment and suggests, and a situation where myself and my partner can just be ourselves. And then they go on to say that they don't want corporations monetizing their relationship. So in the confidential information archetype, the most reported location was the place of work. The main issue here was that participants had was either breaking some laws or rules against sharing information that's considered private. As you can see here, what's being captured on people's screens, their notes, but also HR and financial data. P6 says that also conversations between their colleagues, if disclosed, would break their professional relationship. So in this archetype, it was most of the locations prohibited a certain type of data being collected, and the sentiment from the participant were that they didn't want to inadvertently break the rules of the establishment that they were in. As shared by P54 here, it's not allowed to record in these scenarios. So we wouldn't want to get in trouble when referring to being in a movie theater. In this archetype, the most common location was while shopping or eating. The main risk posed to the participant were that they didn't necessarily want their buying patterns or behaviors to be tracked to advertise and sold to advertising companies and then presented back to them as adverts. As you can see in the quotes, I don't want people knowing my buying patterns. I don't like the idea of my AR glasses identifying the kind of fridge that I have, what it contains, what type of food that I eat. Next is the archetype when people just want to be alone and they're expected to be alone. The most reported location here was educational establishments. You can see personal conversations, for example, could be collected as P65 says. Students may discuss problems or ask questions they'd rather not publicize, especially before or after sessions. Or wearing an AR headset in itself breaks their connection between somebody and their God, as expressed by P13 here. And then finally, the last archetype is being outside in a public location. The main sentiment here is that, once again, that it's other people's privacy that's being affected by your decisions. Without them even being aware. So as P13 says all the random people around me didn't consent. Our participants also were concerned about their own individual data while being outside. And as P8 here says, the threat to their travel history being collected. So where does this leave us? The first thing here that's obvious is that our participants indicated that there are locations where they would like not to be collecting certain data types. Yet the burden cannot be placed on the user to manually change their permissions every single time they enter a new location. The previous research even shows people don't change their permissions after they first set them anyway. A new dynamic permission system is so obviously needed, even in the case of moving towards finer-grained permissions, such as using recognizers in the example here, that capture different levels of data fidelity. that dynamically change based on the user's context. However, it's extremely difficult for an AR headset to identify different contexts. How does a headset know that the piece of paper is just confidential or just generic information? This is where we need to look further than just a purely computer vision solution. What if maybe it's just safer to assume all bits of paper within this location, or when connected to a certain Wi-Fi signal, should just be classified as confidential by default? Or if you're on a beach, maybe the headset's using the being outdoors archetype. But once it spots that you're on a nudist beach, then it changes to a more conservative modesty and nudity archetype. So obviously our list of archetypes here are not complete. There are so many more archetypes that exist that we don't present in this paper. And also, a lot of these archetypes change and differ around the world based on cultural differences. So when in certain locations around the world, it might be fine to capture specific types of data as the way we present in the heat map, but somewhere else in the world might be completely illegal. So with that, these are my key takeaways of my talk. There are locations and contexts where people want their headset not to be collecting certain data types. About them, others around them, and also the space that they're in. We provided a list of archetypes which contain locations, what makes them sensitive locations in the first place, along with the sensors that should be limited within those archetypes. And then finally, we emphasize that AR permissions must change dynamically on the user's behalf based on their context. This removes the burden from the user and onto the headset itself. I look forward to taking your questions.
Any question? Thank you.
Thanks, Melvin, for your talk. Just a quick question. Can you go in more depth about how the onboarding process was for informing users about AR capabilities?
Yes. So we took the assumption that the participant may have never even heard of what the term augmented reality is. So we show the actual onboarding stuff in the paper in full, but some of it was just explaining what the idea of your world being augmented with augmentations. We also showed that the examples of what exists now, but also the examples of what, such as the HoloLens, and what we class as everyday AR headsets, and we showed like pictures of normal glasses like you're wearing now. Then we showed the type of sensors that they were using, but also it's very difficult just to say, oh, this is a depth sensor, it collects your depth. We described the sensors. Even during the survey, we said collecting the view of your world from your point of view, or the sound that's around you, rather than saying microphone or front camera, because then that gets a bit more complex when it comes to the EEG, for example. It's people might know what it is, but not really understand what it is. I hope that answers your question.
For sure. Was it in the form of a video, or was it something they read?
So we had both text and images describing the information.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments, please? Okay, so let me ask one question. What the next? Your direction of your survey of the privacy issue is what is the next?
What's
plan?
next for me to
Yeah.
graduate? No.
Of course.
No. So what's next? I would say is so this previous work looking at a world-based data access system. So essentially, when you walk into a gym locker room, it turns your camera off. What was missing, we mentioned in the paper, is well, what are these locations and which specific sensors to be turned off? So this would then lead straight into, would motivate implementing that into the real life. What's next for me specifically is looking at, well, now we're in a situation where people's data are changing dynamically around them. It'd be nice to have some sort of awareness of what's actually on right now and what's not on right now. Even the sense of just confirming to the user when you're in a bathroom, your camera is not being used. Yeah, I would say that's what's next.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually interested in the technology, but this kind of issue is really important. So this session is really important, even though the maybe audience seems to be small, but we enjoyed discussing about very, very important topics in the future of AR and MR, XR technologies. Okay, thank you for everybody's presentation, and thank you for coming, and let me close the session. Thank you.